Thank you very much, Ollie. It's lovely to be here today. I'm Kirsty Dias. I'm the Managing Director of Priestman Goode, and I'm also one of the trustees of the Priestman Goode Employee Trust. So today, here we go. I'm just going to give you a quick potted history of what Priestman Goode do and really talk to you about our journey towards employee ownership. So Priestman Goode is a design consultancy specialising in the passenger experience. So we work across all forms of transport, but we are very focused on designing a better future. I thought we'd just quickly go through our values, because I think as an employee-owned company, these are absolutely the things which drive us. We are about people, so the scale of project that we work on means that millions of people use our designs every day, be that for Transport for London or for people like a company like United Airlines. But we're also, as a product design consultancy, driven by the user. And I think this is very applicable to employee ownership. Everything we do from a work perspective starts from a user perspective, so really thinking about what's best for the user. And I think this approach has really kind of tied in well with our internal comms with our employee owners. We're very forward thinking, so a lot of what we do is focused on the future. Many of the projects that we work on have quite a long life, so what we design today is very much for the future. Yeah. And, you know, obviously we are thinking as an EOT very much into the future about always what kind of company we collectively want to be working in and create. We're very ideas driven, so we do a lot of our own concepts. And again, you know, we have engagement from all levels of our employees in the development of these future concepts, which kind of drive industry thinking in specific sectors. But we are pragmatic, so we very proudly say we deliver what we design. So if you look at a lot of the concept work that we do, it will be very close to the actually delivered project, final delivered project. And last but not least, we are in it together. So we work very collaboratively with our clients in partnership, but we also, with our employee owners, you know, are sharing both the risk and reward. So we are collectively benefiting from kind of the hard work and commitment that everybody puts into the work. So a quick potted history. The company was formed in 1989 by Paul Priestman, who was then quite shortly joined by Nigel Goode, and then later by Luke Hawes. And they have run a very successful business, but were planning for the future. So what was going to come next? And they looked at the various models that were open to them, from selling to kind of a larger group, looking to management buyout, or simply by closing the door one day. And then they decided to look at employee ownership. And this, I think, played well for Priestman Goode because we have many long-serving members of the team. So there was certainly commitment there and a structure which could be developed for the future. So in March 2016, a majority share was sold to the trust for the employees on a 5-year repayment scheme. And we are nearly at the end of that. So we will complete our last payment in September 2021. And in April 2019, when we had, you know, kind of 3 years under our belt of employee ownership, the founding directors agreed to sell the remaining shares to us. So we will push straight through to 100% ownership. And we think that kind of second lot of the second payment, as it were, will be made in September 2022. I should say this schedule has been slightly affected by COVID, but I will talk about that a bit later. So in 20 prior to 2016, there were 3 directors on the board, the 3 founding directors. But when we became employee owned, 3 additional directors were appointed to the board from our existing team, and I was one of those directors. We also obviously set up a trustee board, and we have on that an external chair, 2 of the founding directors, 1 board director, which is me, and then in 2016 we had 1 employee representative who was appointed as a director. And then later in 2019, in order to kind of help improve and extend the engagement with the team, we appointed an additional employee director. So at the beginning, I just thought I'd go through kind of, you know, how we communicated and what our activity plan really has been. So when we initially became an EOT, in that first year, we kind of talked to the employees about the kinds of changes or benefits that they wanted to see in our new world as an employee-owned company. And for a couple of years, well, yeah, for several years, we communicated with the team in large meetings where we would meet with everybody at the same time. And although we did some breakout groups at points about specific issues, we did kind of have these very large meetings because we felt it was kind of important that we were kind of democratically talking to people at the same time. We also carried out surveys to see what kinds of benefits people wanted. And in the first couple of years, I will go on to show you, we did deliver some significant benefits, which really changed kind of, I think, predominantly the work-life balance of many of the team, which was really appreciated. And we were also, from kind of April 17 was the first bonus that was given. We were able to give a bonus which, you know, grew in the first couple of years. And in that first year or so, 18 months, we implemented flexible working. So previously we had quite fixed a working day, and we introduced just flexibility around a kind of core day with, you know, people could choose whether they came in earlier or later. And that was actually a really big step forward for us culturally, and, you know, made people's, I think, you know, work-life balance much easier. We also introduced something called My Time. I mean, obviously, as a creative business, it's really important that our designers are continually kind of inspired or seeing and experiencing new things, because that all informs the design that they do every day for Priestman Goode. And there were, you know, in previous years, there had always been, you know, requests here and there. Could people take work time to go and see an exhibition or trade shows or various, you know, things, watch something, learn something new. But it was on a very ad hoc basis. And we realized this was very important to us as a business, that this kind of activity was prioritized. So every person gets, under, we call it My Time, half a day every 2 months to go and spend as they choose. So, you know, go to a museum, a gallery, trade show, as I said, or even choose to do, you know, training on some new software at their desk. But it's all about being inspired, basically. And then we have studio lunches, again, every other month for everyone to come and share those experiences. So people share what they've seen, and this obviously creates kind of a knowledge base for us, and has been a really great way, I think, of bringing the team together and making people feel that, you know, that spending their time in that way, you know, is given permission for people to do that, which I think has been really important. We also did things like we kind of improved parental leave, around pregnancy for both mothers and fathers, a bit more kind of equality in our initial weeks or time that we give. And we also offered increased holiday for long service, and that of course recognises that quite a lot of our team have been with us for 5 years plus. So here we move into April 2019, and we're still giving an increased value. So the value of our kind of bonus unit is increasing year on year, which obviously is very welcome by everyone. But we realised that there is perhaps more clarity that's needed around what the areas of responsibility are for PG Limited, so Priestman Goode Limited, the operating company, and what influence the employee owners can have and what responsibility they can take on, and where they can affect and implement change. And I think it's also worth saying at this point that I think quite a lot of our engagement was informed by myself and my fellow trustee, who's the employee rep, attending events like in our first year, we came to we spent a day, I think it was at Field Fisher, learning about where some research was shared about millennials' engagement with employee ownership. And that and the discussions that happened around that, where we heard different companies share examples of, the kinds of activities they were doing with their employees, that really helped us in the first year. And then in in 2019, where we did this kind of communication around clarity of areas of responsibility, that was really informed by our attendance at one of the employee association, ownership association conferences. So we came to that, I think, at the end of 2018. And I think one of the things that we've learned and has particularly come to the fore this year is that obviously, organizations change all the time and people move on and you're getting new people, and you have to kind of, it might feel like repetition, but you have to remind people all the time about, why you are an employee-owned company, what difference does it make, what different kind of behaviors people might have as a consequence. And I think that particularly this year, when you're in it and you think, oh, well, I've been here for 5 years, so of course I know the history to this. There are lots of people that just, if they're not kind of living it every day, they're kind of unaware of that. So we, did this in 2019, we did an exercise where we did very clearly kind of dig into these different areas. So we had knowledge sharing, where we were doing these sharing activities more around kind of the project work we do. And I think it's also worth saying at this point that a lot of the feedback we got right from the beginning, a lot of it was about operational improvement. So a lot, the team were coming up with ideas of, could we do things differently in this way? But rather than it being specifically focused about benefits, it was actually about improving the way we operate as a company. So, things like this, for example, from knowledge sharing, where we are learning from each other about different projects that people are doing, that's been incredibly important. Then sharing of, kind of continual professional development, so sharing of information within the team, that has certainly become something that the employees are very engaged in. Obviously, social events, very important. Our kind of charity, like the work we do more on the corporate social responsibility front, where we, develop relationships with schools, colleges and universities, but that's often very you know, we, for example, run an internship scheme every year where we get a couple of students who spend a whole year with us. And we now have 3 employees who have come to us as, you know, as graduates, having been interns with us. So I think, you know, for me, employee ownership is so much about those relationships that it's really important for us as a company that we're investing with, you know, a much more younger level, the schools, colleges, universities, because potentially they are our future employees. And then we see, you know, I don't know, yesterday I was doing some interviews for our next internship with one of our graduates, and it just provides that kind of continuation, which I think makes people want to stay with us. So it's encouraging that kind of long-term career with us. So all of these activities, which you know, we are saying are kind of employee ownership activities, they are actually kind of, yeah, feeding who we are as a business. It's very much kind of embedded in our culture. We also have lots of opinion about, under career development, I obviously talked about my time and training a little bit, but with the building, you know, being designers, there's lots of opinion about the kind of environment in which we work, how that looks and how it can work better. So we, you know, we have active engagement in that area. And then, you know, kind of down the line, we also have, you know, obviously opinion and, you know, interest in kind of the other benefits that we might share with regard to, say, pension and well-being or healthcare. But I would say for us, I think they are at the lower end of priority. And then we also have innovation, so kind of where we develop future thinking, that again comes very much from the team. But one of the things we learned right at the outset from the Millennial Engagement event that we went to back in 2016 or 17 was from one company saying that, you know, a lot of the dialogue can sometimes be, and the example was given to us of, we want plants in the office. But actually something like that can feel, if for the trustees, that you're being given a request. So we want plants in the office. So, you know, please get us plants in the office. And I think employee ownership is more about, we want plants in the office. I've got a plan. I'd like to lead that. I'd like to own that. I'll work out who's going to get the plants, who's going to water the plants, how much it's going to cost, come up with a plan, go to the board and then have it approved. And then there is real kind of ownership about, you know, an initiative. And I think that was such a good learning for us. And we are definitely, I think after, you know, when we introduced this model, we definitely saw more of that kind of engagement. So our Green Manifesto is a really good example of that, where sustainability is really important to the team. They want us to improve, you know, how we're operating in that way. And we developed this Green Manifesto where we reviewed all of our supply base. So we switched energy suppliers, we moved to having milk delivered in glass bottles rather than, you know, getting it from the supermarket. But, you know, in very practical terms, there are 2 members of staff who have led that. They make sure the milk bottles are washed and they help carry the crates to the door at the end of each day. So there's very kind of practical engagement in that. What's another example? I mean, that is kind of a constant changing initiative, in that we're, you know, constantly reviewing our supply base. We get recommendations of, you know, kind of more sustainable choices that we could be making. And we're now, one of our team is now leading something called the Hummingbird Project, where kind of on a more personal level, she's very actively encouraging people to kind of, you know, reach certain goals, to make different choices at home, to be greener. But that's, you know, that is just community, you know, there's no pressure for people to sign up to it, but if they want to, they can. We also improved our bereavement policy so that it's more reflective of, you know, modern families and relationships. So it's not just about, you know, your kind of next of kin. And that was something, again, that very much came from the team. And we introduced more schemes to kind of help people buy bikes and also buy their own tech at home, computers, etc. And I've actually put in here, we became ISO 9001 compliant. So, you know, the quality standard that I'm sure lots of people are familiar with. But I think that has been really important for us as an EOT, because I think it shows that we are exercising good governance in the way in which we operate the business for the employee owners. So I think, you know, that ISO accreditation gives the employees reassurance that the company is being managed in, you know, in the most professional and best way it can. And I think that's a really important aspect of being a trustee for the employee owners. So here we are, we got to March 2020. Our financial year 1920 had been our best yet as an employee-owned company. Well, in fact, it had been the best year we'd ever had. And we had, you know, we were offering a great unit value, and then it was COVID. We hit COVID. So by the end of 2021, you know, we're in a slightly different picture. There was no bonus this year, April 2021, but we had managed to get through the year without furloughing anyone. We had minimal redundancies, but we also had, without question, increased participation and much better communication and engagement through smaller groups and the introduction of we call them EOT reps, but, you know, employee owner reps. So each small group has a representative. And sorry, I think, interestingly, when you hit, what we've learned this year is when you hit a more financially challenging year, the tone of the conversation changes. And I think this is where it's important to understand the history of where the employee ownership comes from. So we had, you know, I think, to work really hard at communicating as a business. So we asked our employees to take a pay cut for 3 months, which they did in, I think, May, June and July last year. So it was for 3 months, which we did in fact repay in February this year. But we definitely reached out to our employees to support us through some difficult months. We also quickly moved to working from home in the first lockdown, and we were heavily reliant on that first lockdown on employees, in some cases using their own equipment. But as a consequence, there was much more kind of robust and challenging debate and discussion. And I feel that has made us a much stronger and more resilient EOT. When we came back after Christmas, you know, I think for everyone, for the world, that was very hard going into that next lockdown. I think people were increasingly feeling more isolated, and it was impacting people's well-being. And I think it was at that point that we introduced these smaller groups, and each group themselves elected a representative to each group, who then met separately with myself and the employee, the trustees who represent the employees, and we now meet on a monthly basis. We also introduced weekly meetings just to increase that contact, and we introduced a weekly newsletter. But I think we also had a meeting, it would have been early in 2020, with the founding directors, to just go through the history of why we become an EOT in the first place. Because I think when there isn't a bonus and you're still making payment to the founding directors, it's more difficult to justify that in the employee's mind, because they're like, we're still making this payment, but we're not getting a bonus. But we were actually at the point where we were at the final payment. We needed to make the final payment this year of the first majority share. And we in fact were able to, and this is a benefit of employee ownership, we actually were able to negotiate with the founding directors to split that payment over. We've split it over 2 financial years. So we made one from last financial year, and we'll make one from this. So we split it in 2 so that we would break even. But explaining that to your employees, so taking them on that journey with you, just explaining the financial context is really, really important. But I really feel like when we used to do the large meetings, it felt like it was quite a one-way conversation. So it was big groups of people. People didn't really like talking, in front of lots of people. It also felt quite one way, like we were doing a lot of telling. And that has completely been turned on its head. So we are having much more kind of free-flowing dialogue. It's like we're in such a different and more positive place. And we're, back on track to move towards 100% ownership, and, with much more engaged employee owners. And I think we will be much more prepared for the change of the next stage, because I think, we will probably change the composition of the trustee board when we move into the next, the final tranche of payment. And, we've got more prospective employee directors, because we've got people who are much more invested in employee ownership. So that's where we're at in our journey. But I think, one of the most important things is that it changes all the time. And so there's not a point at which you reach and you're like, the job is done. It's like living, changing, organic conversation and relationship with your employees, and you kind of need to change in response to that, all the time. But I would say, we are I'm really confident about saying we're in a really good place, and I have appreciated the challenge that the employee owners have given us this year. And I think it's really important because sometimes I think it can feel really demanding and overwhelming, but I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and really listen, and, respond accordingly, because that, I think, is what makes you better. So thank you very much for listening to me today.
Kirsty, fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing with us today. So I took quite a lot from that, and certainly I would say listening to the employees was very much at the forefront of what you've done at Priestman Goode, and being able to listen and hear what their values are, what they're wanting from work, and the approach that you're certainly taking with multiple generations, and the link to the research you've been referring to, by the way. If everyone hasn't seen it, Jeremy Gadd has kindly posted it in the chat. Understanding what different generations are wanting from work has clearly been something that you focused on at Priestman Goode.
Yeah.
I've got questions, but it seems so has everybody else. So I'm going to fire these at you, as it were, if you don't mind responding as best you can. The first one's an easy one, and it's a quick one. How many staff in the business?
Oh yeah, sorry, I meant to say that at the beginning, actually. Sorry, apologies for that. We are about 55 in number.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. And a question from Andrew Evans at Geldards. Why would the EOT want or need to buy the 34% shareholding when it already controls the company? Was the price substantially discounted to reflect the minority interest, or did it take account of any growth in the value since 2016?
So the company was valued in 2016, and the contract that we have has basically I think it's called a put option in it, where we will revalue the business next year at the point of purchasing the final share, and I believe that protects our rights, that we will never pay more than the initial valuation, but we might end up paying less for it if it was valued differently. But evaluation, I think, is done over like an average of 3 years. So I don't know. The valuation of our company has probably gone up since 2016. So by the time you take last year out of it, it might kind of even out the same thing. I think that's what we're thinking. And why do we want to be 100% owned? I think, we are, we want to be able to deliver, more for our employees. And we see that 100% ownership will do that, because if we don't do that, we'll be having to pay the minority shareholders some kind of dividend anyway. So we see that might as well go to the employees.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. A question here from Nigel. What role/voice did the staff have in setting the strategy and the operational performance? That very much comes from the board. So I would say, although we have taken feedback around operational improvements, at the moment there isn't dialogue around setting strategic objectives with the EOT input. Okay. One of the points that you made in the presentation was around clarity. Yeah, you felt that within the business that you've been clear but could be clearer as to the roles. But it seemed to me, from what you're explaining, that people understood the role of the PG board and the role of the EOT board and their roles and responsibilities. So I would say best practice tells us that clarity as to what decisions that people can be involved in and cannot be involved in is needed from the start, but will take time to be embedded. Yeah, I think that that I think was a learning from us from that EOA conference that we came to. Good. I'm glad we helped. The small groups that you referred to, how were they arranged? Were they by department or job role? They are pretty. Each group has a mix of different levels of people. So we didn't want it to be like senior team, mids, juniors. Each group is more representative of a mix, and it's not department related. And the employee reps were nominated by their peers in that group. Okay, so within that process, that election process, again, clarity would be needed, no doubt, as to what the roles and responsibilities of those elected reps would be. The danger being sometimes that people may feel it becomes a bit of a popularity contest, that John and Emma, everybody likes them, they'll be great at doing the job, but they don't fully understand what the role is. So you must have created that clarity at the very start then.
Yeah, I mean, some groups have, opted, we've kept it very loose actually. So some groups have opted for a kind of rotating role, so that, different people might come to the meetings each month. I mean, it does tend to be the same people, but some groups have a couple of people who rotate. Which I think, we are a relatively small organisation, but I think that is quite healthy.
Okay. Question here from Stuart. Did all staff directors downward take a pay cut?
Everybody. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is absolutely key. Yeah.
Question from John. Does every plan put forward by the EOT require board approval, or do the EOT have budgets for certain things?
The EOT don't have a budget specifically. So, for example, if there was we do have a budget for social events, for example, but that is within the Priestman Goode, limited budget. So that we would expect, if it was anything that required expenditure, there would have to be some kind of proposal to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Priestman Goode Limited.
And a question from Lisa. What does the Trust Board use as evidence for assurance that the operational board are anticipating impacts of change in social and ethical attitudes?
We report to Priestman Goode Limited report to the trustee board twice a year. But we have had, I would say, in fact, increased engagement in the last 12 months. We've probably had like 3 meetings just to verify different decisions, we were making, and using making sure that the trustee board are informed, and we produce an annual report every year, which does ensure that we, cover good governance. So that's what we do to reassure the trustees. Is there anything specific around social and ethical attitudes?
Lisa, Freya, anything additional to your question that you posted in the chat?
No, I was just wanting to understand, obviously, the Trust's role of oversight and making sure that operationally things are in place, and how you what mechanisms were in place. So you've answered that with the report and hearing and giving evidence back to them. So thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
We've got a couple of minutes, so any final questions, please do put them into the chat and I'll try and get them answered by Kirsty. But Kirsty, I guess from me, what would be for harnessing employee voice and the means to do that, what advice would you give to a recent employer-owned business or long-term employer business as the best way for the trust to collate the voice of the employees and to understand that?
I think first and foremost is don't harness it. That suggests that you're trying to rein it in, doesn't it? I think what it should be is free and open dialogue. And I think we've definitely found that has improved by the employees being given time to discuss amongst themselves, how they feel about, certain decisions or initiatives, or that, their participation in the discussion is, they've been given the time to, on a regular basis, to be more open about what they're feeling about whatever issues are at play at the time. And so what would I give advice to a trustee board is that the role of the directors who are representing the employees is an active one. You know, you can't sit back and expect that you're going to hear from them spontaneously. You need to provide structure, and you need to create channels of communication to make that work effectively. You know, I think it is a very active role.
And were the employee trustees, did they have any training? What guidance were they given in taking up the positions?
They haven't actually, beyond kind of engagement with like taking part in the going to the conference, for example. I think that was kind of really beneficial in terms of learning. But we have we have signed up for some training with you actually about being effective trustees.
Okay.
So
I didn't actually know that. So I didn't know that. So it sounded like I was linking to a plug to our course, but I didn't actually know. But that's great.
That is true. I can verify for that. This is not an ad.
Good. We don't do that. There's just one more question that's coming from Nigel, which I'll squeeze in. Has your organisational structure changed as a result of becoming an EOT? For example, have line management roles or hierarchy changed?
This is a great question. We are kind of actively looking to make some changes this year, and we will be making some changes around that. I think I don't know whether it's to do with being an EOT or whether it's just an HR kind of challenge, but I think where you have a small business where you've got a lot of people who've been in who've been with you, long-serving members of staff for a long time, you're obviously, you can reward through bonus, but structurally it becomes kind of, quite top heavy. And we see that creates frustration for our employees. So we're trying to, doing some work to try, adopt a different kind of structure, which might be a bit freer.
Fantastic. Right, that's the last question. Thank you very much indeed. Kirsty, on behalf of all of us all, we appreciate the time and effort that you've put into this, and for being so honest and sharing your reflections at Priestman Goode over the time that you've been employee of. So thank you very much.